Diageo PLC is selling its stake in Guinness Nigeria PLC, joining other multinationals who are exiting or reducing their exposure to the West African nation that's facing its worst cost of living crisis in decades. In response to emailed questions, Diageo said, quote, "The transaction is consistent with its flexible asset-light beer operating model, which allows it to select the most appropriate structure and route to market for Guinness based on local conditions while retaining ownership of the iconic Guinness brand." Now, UK-based Diageo will sell its 58.02% stake in Guinness Nigeria to Singapore-based Tolaram that sells consumer goods and is also an investor in the nation's new Lekki deep-sea port for about 81.6 naira a piece for about $70 million. Now, according to a statement, as part of the deal, Diageo will enter into a long-term license and royalty agreement with Tolaram for the production of the Guinness brand and its locally manufactured ready-to-drink and mainstream spirit brands. The transaction is expected to be completed in fiscal year 2025. Well, of course, fiscal year ends in June for Guinness. Now, once complete, Guinness Nigeria will remain listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, and Tolaram will launch a mandatory takeover offer in compliance with local law requirements, according to the statement. Diageo will retain ownership of the Guinness brand, which will be licensed to Guinness Nigeria for the long term and remain in the country through its international premium spirits business. Let's take a look at the most recent earnings for Guinness Nigeria PLC. Third quarter loss, 56.4 billion compared to 1.8 billion profit in the same period in 2023. The 9-month 2024 loss was 61.6 billion naira compared to a 5.8 billion naira profit in the same period in 2023. And once again, Guinness fiscal year ends in June. Joining us to discuss further is Gbolahan Ologunro, who is an associate portfolio manager at FBNQuest Asset Management. Gbolahan, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you being on the show. First off, I guess, what do you make of this deal as it's been announced to the NGX?
Yeah, Rotus, thank you for having me. So firstly, I think this acquisition has reinvigorated the long-standing discourse regarding the exit of multinational companies from the Nigerian market. Already so far, we've seen the exit of Unilever, we've seen the exit of Procter & Gamble, as well as GlaxoSmithKline in the healthcare industry. So I think, first and foremost, that exit from MSC has been further amplified with this recent move by Diageo. Secondly, I also believe that this also lends credence to the fact that in the long term, there might still be value in the consumer goods industry despite the myriad of challenges confronting the sector today. For Tolaram to have invested a substantial amount into Guinness today, it's probably reflective of the fact that they are still confident that they have confidence that there's still some value within that sector.
All right, now a lot's been said about, I guess, the challenges the brewery sector has been facing. The earnings numbers with respect to full, third quarter 2024 versus the previous year, also 9-month period. What do you make of those numbers for the company, for Guinness?
Yeah, interestingly, we saw revenue expanding by about 28% for 9 months 2024. However, the company still ended 9 months 2024 with a loss, and that was largely due to foreign exchange losses amounting to about 83 billion. So that has remained the key driver behind the underwhelming results we've seen from not just Guinness, even across other industry players within the sector. If you look at Nigerian breweries as well, we saw losses coming in at about 73 billion. For international breweries as well, for Q1, they also posted about 93 billion. So cumulatively, you're looking at foreign exchange losses at about 249 billion.
Wow.
Across the 3 industry players.
Gosh. Now, the stock did climb in at least the last day of trading before the Democracy Day holiday. What do you make of the appreciation in the stock price?
I think the bargain hunting we saw in the shares of Guinness today can be attributed to 2 sets of investors. So firstly, you have some investors who are probably optimistic that the entry of Tolaram would perhaps lead to the implementation of strategic initiatives that would turn around the fortunes of the company, just given the fact that we've not seen strong performance, at least from a bottom line perspective, from Guinness in the last 2 years. I think so. Some investors are probably having that forward-looking view in terms of taking position now ahead of stronger improvement in the company's performance going forward. Secondly, I also want to believe that some investors are also bracing up for perhaps the possible delisting of Guinness from the stock exchange. So just given where the stock price is today, I think it's a good entry point if you had to speculate that we'll probably see the delisting in years to come.
Can you speak to the challenges that breweries firms in Nigeria have been facing?
I think the challenges are quite broad. Firstly, you want to look at the impact of the currency devaluation on their finance costs. You also want to look at the high cost of operations, which you can attribute to the weak operating environment, really, in terms of cost of distributing your products across the country. In addition, the weak consumer demand, I think, has also further weakened the ability of most industry players to also pass on these cost pressures to consumers in form of higher prices.
Speaking of which, how much of a headwind for the breweries firms is the lower disposable income of consumers, of Nigerians?
I think we can't really quantify how huge that impact is for consumer good names, because they are faced with the double whammy effect of high cost of operation, like I mentioned earlier. Then secondly, as well, competition in the industry is quite intense. So you are also worried, or you have concerns with regards to losing market share if you hike prices aggressively. So given the double whammy impact confronting these industries, really, there is that constraint in pushing cost pressures to consumers in the form of higher prices. So that's weak consumer demand. It's a major issue for for all of the industry players.
Now, the sachet economy, shrinkflation, can you speak to that in terms of how these firms are trying to cope with the challenges?
Yeah, so I would say basically sachetization as well as shrinkflation are more or less adaptative strategies that most of these industry players have been compelled to implement, just given the tight macro landscape. If you look at sachetization, basically involves rolling out existing products in smaller sizes. What I would do for those companies is to just broaden the accessibility to those at the lower ladder of the income bracket. So you're looking at just making those products more affordable and accessible to low-income earners. For shrinkflation, on the other hand, pretty much just reducing the volume of your product. Take, for instance, a 33 cl can. You can decide to reduce that to about 30 or 28 liters, and then you just maintain the price. So effectively, price per unit will be maintained, but because volume has reduced, your variable cost, if you net it out from your price per unit, your variable cost per unit would have reduced. So effectively, your contribution per unit would increase, which is positive for profitability, all things being equal.
Thank you so much for that breakdown. Some have said that the Guinness brand, is going to be in good hands with Tolaram. What do you make of that assessment?
Interestingly, I think that assertion is quite valid to a very large extent. If you look at the strides made by Tolaram in the noodles industry with Indomie, I think some years back we saw intense competition within that space with the influx of new players into the industry. However, I think they were able to hold their ground, preserve their market share, and just given the current dynamics in the brewery industry today, with international breweries surpassing Guinness in terms of market share, with currently international breweries has a market share of 24% relative to Guinness with a market share of 21%. So it will be interesting to see how Tolaram would come up with strategic initiatives to sort of wrestle back its market share as the second largest brewery company in Nigeria.
You mentioned a number of brands in different sectors that are either scaling back their operations or exiting Nigeria. Do you worry that there may be more announcements of that sort down the line?
Yeah, I think, when we saw the exits of Unilever, Procter & Gamble, GlaxoSmithKline, we all thought perhaps we've gotten to a point where we should see some stability within the consumer goods space where further exits by international, multinational companies, will no longer take place. But, here we are today talking about the exit of Diageo. So I think that if macro conditions don't improve from where we are today, the currency challenges, if it continues to persist, weakness in consumer demand, that is still quite prevalent as well. And the operating landscape is still not conducive enough for businesses. So if you put into context all of these headwinds in the economy without scope for improvement going forward, I don't think we should rule out the possibility of perhaps more companies are also exiting the country.
Now, is Nigeria caught between a rock and a hard place? Because of course it's Democracy Day. We're going to hear from the president. He's going to look back on the past year and he'll say the tough decisions he had to make, the reforms. Those reforms, many would say that they had to be made. The removal of subsidies or partial removal or whatever, and then the exchange rate liberalization, which has caused some of these issues. Yeah. So it's almost like damned if you do, damned if you don't. How did you assess the decisions that had to be made and with what these companies are facing now? Yeah,
so for me, I think in hindsight now, we can see maybe a comprehensive assessment was not done in terms of the implications of those policy pronouncements made when the president was sworn in terms of removal of fuel subsidy and the eventual liberalization of the foreign exchange market. But with where we are today, the country is in, I think, a precarious situation. But I think there are still policy actions that can be taken to sort of ease the pressure on Nigerians. And I will speak to the currency market, for instance. Recall that at some point we were able to stabilize the currency to about 1,100, but today rates have climbed up to about 1,480, 485. That seems to be like a new level that the currency has been sort of operating in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So I think if we are to really address the challenges in the FX market, we would need more sustainable sources of dollar inflows. You want to look at long-term solutions such as diversifying the export base. But before we get to that, I think there are some low-hanging fruits the country can explore, perhaps tapping into the Eurobond markets, following the likes of Senegal, Ivory Coast, Benin Republic, and Kenya, who have also accessed the international capital markets this year. I think Nigeria can also sort of follow suit, get a large chunk of US dollar inflow into the country and begin to improve supply steadily into the FX market. But more importantly, in the medium to long term, complementary actions from the fiscal authorities in terms of improving the operating landscape, make it more conducive for businesses, will be fundamental in improving productivity on one hand, strengthening food security in the country, and of course, get us to a point where we're now able to not just meet up with domestic consumption, but also produce enough that we can also export to other countries of the world. But in the short term, I think there are policy actions that can be taken to ease the pressure on Nigerians.
Hey, great assessment. Gbolahan Ologunro, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this. Diageo selling their majority stake in Guinness Nigeria PLC over to Tolaram. Gbolahan, of course, Associate Portfolio Manager with FBNQuest Asset Management. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.